structure of this lecture
Yes.
series.
No, I should stop saying stupid
We're a
things.
bit late already, and Philip has to leave straight after the lecture to the airport, so let's start.
Okay, thank you very much. So I give you the last lecture, and I will talk about the relationship between innovation-led growth, inequality, and social mobility. But of course, inequality is a huge topic, and already I signed a book today with Williamson, translated in Russian, which deals already with inequality and growth, but very much with skill-based technical change. And that's, in fact, it's very important because those are Zvi Grillikes lectures, and you remember that there was already a very interesting debate, and I will not touch much upon it today, but it was interesting. You see, there was a big question to explain, if you have time here, and you have here, you see what I call the skill premium, the average wage of a college graduate divided by the average wage of a high school graduate. You can call that the skill premium, but you know there are other ways. Essentially, up to 1970, you have in the US there is not much trend, and then it goes down up to 1980. And then it goes up a lot, okay? And people try to understand that. So that part was very much the baby boom. You see, in 1945, you have the baby boom generation, and they are more skilled than the predecessors. Why? Because during war, you become a bit more socialist, even in the US, even in capitalist country, you educate people more. And also because in the US, the government wanted to reward the families of veterans. So whenever you had the people who fought in the war, you would pay for education for the children. So that made that the baby boom generation was more educated, and of course you have a scarcity effect, you have an increase in the relative supply of skill, and that made this go on. Then the question was, why did it go up after? And there were various theories on that. Some people tried to argue that globalization was a reason, because somehow opening up to trade to less developed countries, you would compete, the unskilled labor in the US would compete with the unskilled labor in China, in everywhere else, and that would put pressure. You see, that will increase the inequality between skilled and unskilled. But then Krugman and other people, and particularly the most convincing evidence that it was not trade that drove this increase initially was a paper by Berman, Bond, and Grillikes, and in 1994. And that's a very important paper, because they said, well, if it was really the opening up story, you would see that sectors that are more exposed to competition will have had that more than other sectors. But it was not a between sector thing, it was a within sector. All sectors, whether or not they were exposed to competition, experienced an increase in the skill premium, and experienced an increase in the relative demand for skills. You see what I mean? And in fact, what they showed is that this increase in the skill premium was very much related with R&D expenses and with purchases of computers. So they concluded that it had to do mostly with skill-based technical progress. Okay, so there was a whole debate there. Of course, there was the issue, why did skill-based technical progress accelerate here? Acemoglu et al. Have a story that suddenly, because you have a bigger supply of skilled, that would affect the direction of technical change. You would innovate towards machines working with skilled, and that would increase their productivity relative to unskilled. But there was another view that there is also the IT revolution. And when you have a general purpose technology, you have always a phase of acceleration of the diffusion of the general purpose technology. And during that phase, you needed a lot of skilled people, and that could explain the increase in skill. So all that debate is in the book with Williamson. I will not talk about it. I just mentioned this because it has to do with innovation and inequality. And Grillikes was instrumental in that debate. It's really that paper that really put on the map the fact that inequality had to do a lot with innovation and skill-based technical change. Okay, so I thought I should mention that as a minimum tribute that I could pay to Zvi, because that paper was absolutely instrumental in that literature. But today, I want to take issue with my friend Piketty, which I know you know and you've seen, and I want to say why where I agree with him and where I don't agree with him, okay? And that's what I will focus on. So I will really focus on top income inequality, and not so much on this kind of skill premium, okay? So there are many aspects to the inequality debate, okay? And I will focus more on the top income inequality, okay? So, so the first part, so when you start, so there is this work by Atkinson, Piketty, Saez, and others that have documented a sharp increase in top income inequality in the US, in France, and other, in the UK, you see, and they've done various countries. And you all know these curves. That's for the US. So the top curve is the share of income of the top 1% income earners in the US. And the bottom one is the share of income of the top 0.1%. And you see that since the 80s, it has been an accelerated increase in both. So that's the fact they established. And that's completely, you know, everybody agrees on that, and that's a huge contribution. Okay, so so I take stock of that. Okay, I say that's very important. They continued the work of Kuznets, in fact, and they contradicted. It goes against Kuznets in a sense because inequality go up here. Okay, so that's the thing. So the question is, why did inequality go up? And that's where we start disagreeing. Is why? What was the source of increase in top income inequality? And that matters a lot. And what should we do about it? And that's where Piketty and I do not agree. You see what I mean? This is completely admitted. You cannot avoid this. This is, and that was great to establish this. The question is why this, and what should you do about it? And that's where we don't agree. Okay? So why should we focus on top income inequality more than other measures of inequality, like for example the skill premium or the Gini or social mobility? Why? What are the various sources of top income inequality? Should we treat them all the same? And which methodology should we use when designing an inclusive growth policy package? This I talked about a bit yesterday evening, if you were at my afternoon lecture, okay, the extra lecture. Okay, so two main ideas I would like to push here is first that different measures of inequality must be looked at differently. You see, there is top income inequality, Gini, and social mobility. So I will talk about that a little bit. The second idea is that innovation is a source of top income inequality, but there are other sources like entry barriers, lobbying, and they have different effects. And that also I talked about a little bit yesterday evening, okay? And I made the difference between Steve Jobs and Carlos Slim. Steve Jobs is the innovator, Carlos Slim is the guy who becomes rich because he is in good terms with the president of Mexico, and maybe he was an innovator in his youth, but yeah, I have a funny story between my son and the president of Mexico. It was Carlos Salinas. And at the end, I will tell you a funny story with my son and Carlos Salinas. It's a funny story. Yeah, I will tell the story at the end. You don't. You have to sweat a bit before you get my jokes. Yeah. Okay. So let's start with different measures of inequality. One measure is the global measure, skill premium, like I have there. Gini, which is a measure of how far you are from perfect equality. Okay, the ratio between the 90th and the 10th percentile, or the 75th and the 25th percentile, those are more global measures of inequality. Okay, then you have the top 1% or the top 0.1% income share, and then you have, you see, dynamic inequality, which is the lack of social mobility. Well, what we say, we say that there is lack of social mobility. There is a high correlation between parental income and children income. Then we say there is low labor mobility, low social mobility. And it's a more dynamic measure of inequality, okay? And you want to know how they relate to each other. So this is from CORAC, it's an OECD study, it's a cross-country regression. Of course, you could say, well, I hate cross-country regression, but it's a very interesting one because it's very telling. You have on the horizontal axis, you have a measure of Gini, income inequality. And on the vertical axis, you have less mobility. When you move up here, you have less mobility. It's a measure of correlation between parental income and children's income, which is an inverse measure of social mobility. It's a measure of social immobility that you have. And what do you find? Well, on that side, you see exactly, if I didn't put the name of the countries, you would have guessed most of them. Okay? Who do you have here? You have the Scandinavians. They have low Gini and high social mobility. Here you have the US and the UK. I think Russia is probably here now. Maybe Russia is here now, I don't know. Soviet Union was there, and then Schleifer comes and you get there. No, I'm just joking. Okay, so I can afford some jokes on Schleifer. Okay, so that's very interesting. Germany is here, and France is not going very well. You see, even in spite of the fact they had very high tax and very high size of state. France is pretty bad. It should be there. Italy is not doing very good either. You see, that's interesting. I would have put Italy a bit lower, but that's but that I'm not surprised that US, UK is there and Scandinavians are there. So this and you see that globally you have a relationship that more mobility gives you less in broad inequality. That's called the Great Gatsby curve. I don't know exactly why it's called the Great Gatsby curve. Someone knows why it's called the Great Gatsby curve? I don't know why. It's called like that. I didn't invent. But what's very interesting is that Chetty et al., so Raj Chetty, you know, he has 50 arrays, I only have 10, and he has an army of arrays. He's now bringing them to Harvard, and there will be 2 departments of economics. There will be the Raj Chetty department and the rest of Harvard. And on his own, he needs the whole building. Okay, so he's done this study in the QJE 2014, and there he did exactly the Great Gatsby, but instead of doing cross country, he does cross commuting zones. So I will get back to this Chetty because I will use that a lot. He looks at commuting zones between 96 and 2000, when the child is 15 years old, and you have the parental income. And then he looks at the income of the child in 2011, when the child is 30 years old. And then he looks at the correlations, and he looks at how he measures social mobility. And they have that locally. It's amazing the data they have. You know, I saw John Friedman, who works with them. He can tell me, when you go from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Somerville, if I cross Beacon Street, I can see mobility going down. You see what I mean? He can tell you which street you live, and he knows social mobility in your area, exactly. You see, I mean, there are amazing data in the US, because they know they can have a microscope to look at social mobility. And the amazing thing, here I have a measure of mobility, not an inverse measure of mobility. And again, here I have a measure of inequality. And there, that's why I have a decreasing. But again, he gets the Great Gatsby curve, you see? So you see that even you have several measures, but at least between mobility and broad inequality, there seems to be a correlation. Whenever you have more social mobility, it helps having less global inequality. So those two seem to be related. You follow me? That's the Great Gatsby curve. But now things are very different with the measure that Piketty prefers, which is the top income. Because you see, when you do top income, that's the relationship. You have on the horizontal axis, you have the income share of the top income, the top 1%, and you have upward mobility. And you see that commuting zones, which are, that's again from the Chetty paper, that's not from me, in the areas in the US where you have more mobility, the share of income is also higher. So that's very interesting. Typically in Massachusetts, in California, you will have places where you have more mobility and you also have a higher share of top income. In racist states like Mississippi, Alabama and all that, you have less of both. Okay? Less mobility but a lower share of top 1% income. And that gives us the idea that maybe there is innovation there in the equation. What's special about Connecticut, Massachusetts, California? There you have innovation. In Mississippi you have no innovation, or very little, okay? That's the thing. And that's why we thought that was missing. And there is no Great Gatsby curve with top income inequality. You see? That's the difference between broad inequality.
Excuse me.
Yes?
So, just so that I can follow, is there, what's the justification for using the top 1%?
But ask Piketty. He's obsessed by that. He's obsessed by the risk. One day he came to my home. You know, I had a flat in Paris when because I was in Harvard, it was 6 months a year empty. He said it's a scandal that you have that flat. He wanted to. I felt if he was a Soviet commissaire politique, he would have taken my flat out. You see, I mean, he has a problem with that. You see, I don't know.
I know. I understand that it's good.
He has a problem. He has a problem. But I will get back to the top income. Let me continue. Because that's psychanalysis, you know, we get to go beyond economics into psychiatry. Okay. But anyway, so I get back to your question. I'm not just so you see that's very interesting. So you see top income and you see the places where you have more mobility are also places where you have top income. And why? Because presumably there is something that increases both. And the thing that increases both, I will tell you, it's innovation. You see? And that's what's missing in his analysis. He uses a Solow model, the R minus G. It's a Solow model. I love Bob Solow. He's my colleague, my friend. But that's not the right model to talk about inequality and growth, okay? And I will go. Okay, so why should we expect innovation to increase top income inequality? Well, because growth, as I said, is driven by innovation. Innovation generates rents from new products or new processes. It is the prospect of these rents that motivate innovation investments. Mr. Sky is currently the richest, one of the richest men. He's as rich as Wallenberg, but he's among the richest in Sweden. He didn't exist 20 years ago. And he became top because he innovated. Okay? So, why? And then I explained yesterday why innovation differs from other sources of top income. Because innovation generates growth, we know that from the first lecture. But in addition, I will show you today that innovation generates temporary rents. Why temporary? Because there is imitation and creative destruction. And I will show you that the rents are temporary. Second, I will show you that innovation enhances social mobility. Why so? Because of creative destruction. It will be mainly innovation by entrance that generates social mobility. And third, because innovation increases top income, but also enhances social mobility, overall, we will see that innovation does not increase broad inequality. You see what I mean? So that's the nice part of innovation. That's what gives us hope that we can have inclusive growth. You see? Unlike, you see where I will show that more precisely, okay? That's the effect of innovation. So here I rank states years. I do cross-state panel US, but I will be more precise in a moment. Here you have a state year, and when you move to the right, it's that you have higher innovation intensity measured by patenting, and on the vertical you have a measure of inequality, and you see that when you are more innovative, the share of income of the top 1% goes up, but you see that there is no effect on the Gini 99, which is Gini minus the top 1%. And that's very interesting, you see? So, by contrast, lobbying reduces growth because, of course, you put entry barriers, you increase top income inequality, you reduce social mobility because you prevent the creative destruction, and as a result, you increase global inequality. And that's why you don't want Carlos Slims. Steve Jobs is okay, but Carlos Slim is less okay. And that's where you have to deal. And you have the same problem in Russia. You know, you have a number of Carlos Slims. I'm sure you have Steve Jobs in Russia, and how you deal with one and the other. Huh? And that's where you are. Okay. So here you can see in the US, if I had to draw a straight line, that's the effect. Lobbying on the lobbying expenditure. I use Francesco Trebi work that has lobbying by sectors, and then you do bar tick to the lobbying by areas. And you link that with innovation, with top percent, you see a very positive correlation between lobbying and top 1% income share. But you also have, if I had to draw a line between lobbying and the Gini, again I would find a significantly increasing curve between lobbying and the Gini, which I would not find between innovation and the Gini. Okay? So now what I will do is that I will go in more details on my work on top income inequality and innovation. Okay, so let me just look. Where is my file? Is it this one? Yes, okay. So now I go to part 2. Okay, top income inequality. Here we are. View, full screen mode. Okay. So this is a paper forthcoming in the Review of Economic Studies. We worked enormously, we did all kinds of things, because We got a number of referees asking for zillion things. It took 1 year to revise the paper. The paper is 150 pages long, only 40 pages published, and 90 pages are unpublished, online appendix. So anything you want to ask, you can find in the 150 pages. Ah, that's lovely. Okay, so let me start with this. Okay, so that joint work that with Richard Blondel, with whom I did the work on competition and growth, the inverted U. I have Ufuk Aksigit with the University of Chicago. You should invite Ufuk. He's really the young generation on growth, like Clino, like Say. That's really the new generation. Antonin Bergeau is my student. He just finished his PhD at Banque de France. And he was a co-author also of the paper yesterday on missing growth. And David Emus is at the University of Zurich, okay? And I did with him also, and Darren work on environment, you know, you might have seen a paper of ours, AER, the environment and directed technical change. Okay, so the thing that motivated us is to say, first look at something interesting. If you look in the US, the dark curve is the share, again the Piketty, Saez, Atkinson, is the share of income of the top 1%. And this curve is the patent. And you see also an acceleration in the rate of patenting. That's no proof of causality, but it's interesting that both accelerated. And that also gave us some smoking gun, okay? Again, if you look at across states, here you have the change in the log of citations per capita. Across states in the US. And on the vertical axis you have the change in the log of the top 1% income share. All that is between 1980 and 2005. And you see that you have again a positive correlation. In places where you had a bigger increase in citations per capita, in patent citation, you seem to have a bigger increase in top 1%. That's again a correlation. It's no causality. I will go step by step. I just try to motivate you, okay? So the main point is that what I will do, so I went through this. I will not do theory there. I don't want to do theory. And I will tell you exactly what we do. We have US panel data. The data covers the period 1977 to 2011, and what we do is that we regress, so for state I at time t, the log of top income inequality, but we will also consider other measures of inequality, and we regress it on a state fixed effect, on a year fixed effect, and on the amount of patents or other measure of innovation 2 years before, you see, but then I will look at other lag structures. And here we have various controls. Okay? And that's the basic regression that we look at. We want to look at the effect of this on this. Okay? So, the data on inequality, because we want cross-state panel, so they come from Frank 2009. Okay? The data is based on IRS gross income measure, and we have, so that's what we have. On the innovation side, we use US Patent Office data. It provides complete statistics for patents granted between year 75 and 2014. We know the state of residence of the inventor, the date of application, and the link to every citing patent. So we know how much the patent is cited or not. And we will measure the intensity of innovation either by the number of patents in the state in a given year, or by number of citations, or whether the patents are the number of patents that are in the top 5% cited or the top 1% cited. You see, and you can have other metrics of how important the patent is, okay? And that's what we will do. And the controls will be the usual. You will control for unemployment rate, you control for business cycle, we control for the share of state GDP accounted by the financial sector, because you might think it all comes from finance. It's not true. We will control for the size of government sector, because of course government policy may affect both innovation and inequality. We will control for GDP per capita, for growth of total population, and for the maximal marginal tax rates on labor and capital income. Now let me look at the OLS. OLS is just correlation, okay? And that's, can you read the table when you are in the back? Can you read the table? Can you see the table or not? You can't see the table. Why don't you sit closer? You can come closer. Come here, there are many seats. Are you intimidated by the ladies in the first rows? That's the problem, huh? No, but here, look. Look, you intimidate many. You have 5 seats next to Marta. Are you so intimidated? Yeah. Or maybe you're afraid because you're checking. Ah, I see. Of course. Okay. Good. Okay, so what you see is that, you see the correlation between patent measures, whether the number of patents or top 5 cited, top 1 cited, the generality of the patent. Generality is how many fields other than your main field of the patent cite your patent, okay? It's another measure of the importance of the patent. All these measures are positively and significantly correlated with top income inequality. Here I look, the left-hand side is the log of the top 1% income share at time t in state I, and the right-hand side is the patent intensity measured by these ways 2 years before. And you see that there is a significant correlation, okay? But that's a correlation. It proves still nothing. It's okay, it goes in our direction, but that's not enough. Okay, you don't get into the review of economic studies with just a table like this, okay? Now what you can do is that you can look at entrant and incumbent, and both entrant and incumbent innovation are positively correlated with top income share. Okay, both of them contribute to increasing markups. Whenever you have an innovation, it increases the markup in the sector. Typically, you erode markups. When there is no innovation, imitation erodes the markups. And a new innovation will again boost the markups, okay? Whether it's by incumbents or by entrants, okay? Then, here what we look is lobbying. And that's very interesting, lobbying. Because we see that lobbying will reduce the effect of innovation, essentially by entrants. Because lobbying, who lobbies? It's the incumbents. They lobby. And because they lobby, they reduce entry. So there may be that entrants have made innovation, but they cannot implement them. And therefore their innovation will have less effects on inequality. And you see that it's the entrants who are mainly affected. Because the lobbying is done by the incumbents to prevent the entrants to implement their innovations. You see the lobbying there? Raise your hand if I go too fast.
What is the measure of lobbying?
Well, you have spending on lobbying. So you have the TREBI has these measures on how much sector spend, you know, on various things to influence government, on senators, on this. They have lobbying measures, and we use these measures. The big specialist on lobbying is TREBI. You should invite TREBI, because he's a great specialist on that. Okay? So now this is OLS. You could say that's very nice, but this is just correlation. You need to make a case that this is causal. Okay? So we go to IV, and we spend enormous amount of time on that. Okay? So the IV that we took is the state composition of the appropriation committee. So I need to tell you what an appropriation committee is. In the US, you have 2 main chambers of parliament. You have the Senate and the House of Representatives. Each of them, they have what they have an appropriation committee. It's a committee that decides how to allocate federal funds across states. Okay? Most of these funds, some of these funds will go to build highways, but many of these funds go to research institutions. The thing is that if you have a member from Alabama entering the appropriation committee of the Senate, he will try to get porks to Alabama because he wants to be re-elected in Alabama and say, look, I brought you money from the federal funds. So the instrument here is the membership, whether a state is represented or not, in the appropriation committee. You see what I mean? And you could think that it's endogenous. It's not so endogenous. You know how you change the appropriation? Is when someone dies or retires, then you have someone who replaces it. But dying, we take it exogenous here. Although you could think someone, if there is too much growth, he has an indigestion of pirouchkis and dies. But we will take that, we'll abstract from this endogenous channel. We will think that the death of MPs is exogenous. And in fact, what happens is when an MP dies in the US, you tend to replace to maintain the same balance in terms of regions and political party. So it's very much exogenous, this process. I looked at that already 10 years ago with Caroline Hawksby, and we looked again here in detail at this appropriation committee. And that's a very nice instrument. So you see, to have a bit of corruption is very good for econometrics. I don't recommend corruption for economic performance, but it helps econometricians. You see, they can use that as an instrument. You see, so I don't advocate. Oh my God, I am having. Okay, so so that. Alors now you see, for example, very interesting is that Kentucky, you know McConnell. McConnell was the speaker of the Republicans, I think in the Senate. No, I think McConnell, or in the House of Representatives. Nobody from US here can tell me.
In the Senate. In
the Senate, exactly. McConnell. Okay, McConnell arrives in Kentucky in '93. Whoa! What happens? Earmarks in Kentucky by miracle are multiplied by 10. Woo! Funding for research, that's not so bad. Maybe Kentucky is not the place where you need research most. I don't know. If anybody from Kentucky, but I don't know. Of course, it's at the expense of other states, obviously. Kentucky maybe gets, but others lose. It resulted in an increase in publicly funded innovation, and it resulted in an increase in all innovation through spillovers. And here is a beautiful picture. I created, there is the true Kentucky, and there is a synthetic Kentucky. What is the synthetic Kentucky? It's a mixture of states that when you mix them, they look like Kentucky. But the difference is that McConnell doesn't arrive there. You see what I mean? That's the synthetic Kentucky. And the synthetic Kentucky, that's the citations, okay, to patents. That's citation to university patents, that's citation to all patents. And then there is the true Kentucky. Whoop, you see citations to patent go up. That's the McConnell effect. You see? So here I do that with Kentucky. Okay? So you see here the difference between the true Kentucky and the synthetic Kentucky. Here is the difference between true Kentucky and the synthetic Kentucky. Citations to all patents, citations to university patents. And earmarks is the same thing. If I do earmarks, you would have shown that earmarks, of course, the synthetic Kentucky earmarks remain flat, and with the McConnell Kentucky, you know, there is an elevator effect. Earmarks go like this. Okay. Alors now I did that with McConnell. But then what you can do is that you can do that with all states. That means you say, well, I will average over all states. Whenever they have a new member on the appropriation committee, I will call that time 0. So of course it doesn't happen at the same time across all states, but I put them so that I average at 0, okay? And I do the event study, but here now I have, you see here it's earmarks, and so here you see senators go up, so that's on average, that's by how much senators go up the representation on average across all states, and you see the earmarks go up also, again. You see what I mean? But it's not just Kentucky. I average over all the Kentuckys of the US. You see what I mean? And that's what I do. You understand? You average over all states, and you put at 0 the date where the guy arrived. Of course, the true dates are not all the same, but you merge them and you make them look the same, and you average. Everything is average across states. And that's earmarks, and that's citation to university patents, and you see that again the share, that's true. That is exactly what I have for Kentucky, but that's for all states in the US, you see. And that's the share of citation to all patents, or when you take all patents, it takes a bit longer than to university, because you need some time for university patents to spill over to the rest of the economy, you see. And it takes a kind of 2-year delay. But still you have the effect. Yes?
Sorry, how many of these Kentuckys do you have in the sample?
Oh, there are many states. I mean, I forgot. I will say that in the thing. But let me see if I have in the notes here. But it's in the paper, of course. The paper, you have everything. It's 150 pages. So you have all questions too. It's like an encyclopedia. Where is appropriation 2 year? IV. We generalize by greatly over all states that experience at least one increase in the representative in AP. So that makes there are many states, because all the time you have new states, but like, I don't know, 20, 30. Okay. So now the IV results are very interesting, because now here I regress top-income inequality on innovation instrumented by the appropriation committee change. And you see that not only it's positive and significant, the coefficient, but it's higher than it was before. It's almost 10 times higher coefficient. So you could say it's very suspicious that the IV should be much bigger than the OLS coefficient. But in fact, what we believe is that there is something, this inverted U curve that I told you about that's playing out here. You see, it could well be that we have in the OLS, you see spurious factors that play out. You see, if you have the OLS, you see, suppose you remember I have between competition and innovation, I know that I have an inverted U more or less, okay? So you have something like this. And suppose that you are initially to the left of the maximum, and suppose that competition goes down. What would happen if competition goes down? If competition goes down, innovation will go down. But if competition goes down, markups will go up. And that creates a negative correlation between inequality and innovation. You see what I mean? Suppose that something happened that reduces competition. That's what will happen. The OLS will pick it up, but the IV will not. The IV will abstract from something like this. It will only look at the effect of innovation on inequality, abstracting from third factors that will affect both, like competition, for example, like changing competition. And that's why you have higher coefficient here. You see? Okay? So now, and then you have all the measured patterns. So then you get the IV. And what's very interesting is that the increase in innovation between 1980 and 2005, measured by the increase in the number of patents per capita, explains about 23% of the total increase in the top income share. So when you have a fourth at least explained by, and that's just patents, you have a lot of innovation that are not patented. And so this is a very important thing. You cannot ignore it. Innovation is part of the story. It's not the only factor of increase of top income, but it is an important factor. You cannot ignore it. So you need a model that has innovation in it. The Solow model doesn't. Okay? We use another instrument as well, and the other instrument is we instrument innovation in a state by innovation in a neighboring state, and we weight that by the extent to which innovations in the other state are cited by innovation in this state. And we construct another measure that has nothing to do with appropriation committee. But the nice thing is that you get very similar regression coefficient when you use this other instrument. And we can use both combined, and the over-identification test is negative. So you can use them together, either one or the other, or together. And you get that. And that made us believe we had something serious, that the coefficient was similar, and you could use the two instruments in a combined way. Okay? So that's the second ID results, and it's very similar. The coefficients are almost the same as with the first ID, although they have nothing to do. There is nothing more dissimilar than appropriation committee on the one hand and the knowledge spillovers on the other one. And now I would like to show you the other inequality measures. So that's very interesting. I put back again the citation 5 if you are in the most the 5% most cited. Okay. And that's the effect of top income, that's the IV on top income inequality. But then you can look at Afstopp. What is Afstopp? Afstopp is what? Afstopp I will define here. What is Afstopp? Afstopp is this. Average top is equal to the top 10% minus the top 1% divided by 9. So you want to know to which extent, you see, the top 10 is concentrated on the top 1 or is spread among the top 10, okay? But if it's concentrated, if all the top inequality is concentrated on the top 1, the Afstopp should be small. You see what I mean? There should be, that's the, okay, there should be a small Afstopp. So the thing is that what's nice is that it's a broader measure of inequality than the top 1%. And what you see is that, if I find now my, yes, here we are. what you find is that, you see the correlation is smaller when you do half-stop than when you do top 1%. But then you can have Gini, 99, and then you see overall Gini, they are not correlated. And you remember what I told you? That broad measure of inequality are unaffected by innovation. And the reason why is because, as we will see in a moment, innovation fosters social mobility. You see? But that's very interesting. You have an effect of innovation on top income inequality, but you don't see a similar effect on the... There has been a recent paper by Ufuk and co-authors of his on historical US data. And they find that you have a positive, significant correlation between innovation and top income inequality, and they even find a negative correlation between innovation and broad inequality and Gini on historical data. So they find again this difference, you see, on historical data. Here you can look at different lags, and the very interesting thing is that innovation 2 years before is highly correlated with inequality. 3 years before, 4 years before, but after 5 years, you see that innovation is no longer correlated. And that's very consistent with the fact that the rents from innovation are temporary. At some moment, your innovation becomes obsolete. And you see that in the data here. You see? So it's true that innovation increased temporarily, but it gives you temporary rents, whereas Carlos Slim is permanent. As long as you have someone defending Carlos Slim as I don't know if he's in his bed, and he's a nice guy, I'm sure, but as long, you know, he will have his rents, you see, okay? So that's the very interesting thing. And, okay, then you can do all kinds of sectoral control. We can control for financial sector in other ways. We can control for oil and natural resources. We can control for the size of the computer sector, pharmaceutical sector. We can remove patents from highly exporting sectors. We can control for agglomeration effect. I mean, all the kind of controls you can imagine we've done. Okay, so you have all kind of robustness tests. We really did everything we could with the data we had. Okay. And so now I will talk about social mobility. So I will go back exactly to Chetty, and I will use the same data, the same commuting zone. You see, you look at the parents between 1996-2000, you look at the children in 2011, and you look at the correlation between parental income and children's income. So AM25 is one measure they consider, is the expected percentile of the child whose parents belong to the lowest quartile, okay? P15 is the probability that the child is in the first quintile, the highest quintile, where the parents belong to the bottom quintile, etc., etc. And what we do here is that we regress the mobility in this commuting zone I as a function of innovation in a commuting zone I, okay? And then what you get, you see, is this thing. You can get the AMA25, P15, but you see P15 is very much correlated. P15 very much, P25 a bit less, but you see when you make the right controls, all the measures, except of course that's P5, that's the fact you have no mobility, but P15 is the probability that I am in the highest quintile if my parents were in the lowest. P25 is a probability that I'm in the second highest quintile if my parents are in the lowest, and you see that those measures are positively correlated with innovation. You see? But those are correlations. But you know, it has to do with creative destruction. Don't fall asleep. Huh? You know this? I could do that. You know, I had, you know, when you had chalk, what my professors would do, but of course you cannot do that with whiteboard. They would throw chalks. You don't do that in Russia. You don't throw piece of chalks at, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know. I try to think of the food that you ate at lunchtime. I think, but you didn't drink alcohol. Huh? No, Martha, do you remember what he had for lunch? Yeah, oh, I'm going very boring, probably. Okay, so now what's very interesting is that when you look at which is it entrant, what I call entrant innovation is innovation made by people who first innovated less than 3 years before. That's what I call an entrant innovation, because for each innovator, I know their past, I know their history of innovation. So an entrant is someone who started to innovate a very short time ago, is a new guy in the innovation business. All other guys I call incumbent. And before we already saw that both entrant and incumbent contribute to top income. But in terms of social mobility, what's very nice when you do a horse race between entrant and incumbent innovation, is the entrant innovation that wins on the mobility. And that's very much the Schumpeterian. It's really the creative destruction, it's the entrant innovation, because they induce creative destruction, that contribute to social mobility. The incumbent on their own, when you do a horse race, they don't contribute. So that's very nice, because you really get the view that it has to do with creative destruction, you see. So conclusion from this, patented innovation increases top income inequality, but it does not increase broader measure of inequality. And the impact on top income is temporary. Also, we saw that patented innovation is positively correlated with, and particularly by entrants, with social mobility. Okay? And so now, of course, what we want to do, these were aggregate data. I was doing cross-state panel, okay? And I was looking at aggregate inequality in a state, in a year, and aggregate number of citation of patents in a state. Now you can look at individual data. So now I will move to individual data, and I will move to Finland, okay? So which is not very far from here. Okay, so let's go to Finland now. So this is joint work with Otto Toivanen. You know Otto, so if for example you are interested in innovation and you should bring Otto. Transport cost is low, he's in Helsinki. Okay, you can bring him almost by helicopter, no, or by car or whatever, it's close. And Ari Aitinen. So who becomes an inventor? And the question is there, we ask two kind of questions. So there, the interesting thing, we have individual data. We can follow individuals. And we can know who is an inventor, and we can ask what was the income of the parents, what was the education of the parents, and we know about their IQ because they do military service. You have IQ tests for military, no, in Russia, no? You don't do IQ tests? No? You know, in France, you have the funny story that you have the colonel or the captain who asks, who speaks English? And he's a guy who says, I do. Please go and wash the toilets. Yeah, I don't know. You know how that kind of thing. Yeah. So when you do the army, you want to appear very stupid because otherwise they humiliate you. And that was when it was compulsory military service in France. Now it's no. Anyway, that's So that's what you want to know. You want to know, does innovation attract the most talented individuals, or is there misallocation of talent into innovation? And the second question you want to ask, what are the returns to innovation? But on individual data. Here I showed you that it induces social mobility and income at the aggregate level. I want to know at the individual level. And the nice thing is here, we have individual data, okay? And this motivated us, you see. This is a paper from Chetty et al. Chetty, Bell, Van Reenen, Jaravel, and Petkova, I think her name is. And you see, let me just, I did something very stupid there. And, okay. So if you look at the left-hand side, it represents, you see, here you have the income of the parent. So if that's the bottom percentile, and that's the top decile, and that's the probability that you innovate. The probability you innovate is that you have a patent in the US Patent Office. And you see that, if you have very low chance of innovating if your parents are not in the top income. And then when they are in top income, whoop, your probability of inventing is going up a lot. The same is true on historical data, again by this paper by Ufuk and his co-authors that I mentioned. But we thought that for Finland, it would be flat, because Finland, school is free, everybody accessible to all, it's a very egalitarian country. We thought it would be very different. But the surprise is that the same is true for Finland as you have in the US. And we wanted to understand what is behind this curve. Okay. So again, you have and why is it so great? Because you remember the Great Gatsby curve that I showed. I show you again the same one, except I don't have the line here. But you know, no country can be more different than Finland and US. And still you have a very similar relationship between parental income and the probability of inventing, okay? So, the main question, does becoming an inventor depend on socio-economic background, education, or innate ability measured by IQ? And second question, who benefits from innovation? So let me start with the describing the data sets. We have 4 data sets. We have individual data on income, education, and other characteristics from Statistics Finland. We have firm-level data that will allow us to know not only the income of the inventor, but the incomes of the co-workers and the entrepreneur in the same firm. We have patent data. We know who the patents in the European Patent Office. And we have the IQ data, because all males have to do their military service in Finland and they pass an IQ test. And that's very helpful. We got that data from the Finnish Defense Forces. Okay? And we merged these data sets. Okay, so initial sample, 700,000 individuals. We have more than 1,200. What I call an inventor is someone that during this time period has at least 1 patent in the European Patent Office. If you only patent in the Finnish office, you might be an inventor, but it's not. We don't take it as inventor in our paper. Okay. And of course, because only males are in the IQ, you have those are people who had IQ tests born after 61. So who becomes an inventor? Okay, this is the scatter plot of the relationship between father income and the probability of inventing in Finland. This is the relationship between IQ and probability of inventing. Okay, and you see that IQ also matters. Okay. Okay, so now I start here regressing probability of inventing over all kind of parental income, parental education, your education. It's a huge table. When you look at the whole table, it would not fit the whole room here, okay? I zoom here. So here I only look at father income being in the 91 to 95th percentile or 9600 percentile, or mother income. But in fact, of course, you have all the incomes percentiles there. But I just show you this. And you see that having mother or father in the top deciles is significantly positively correlated with your probability of inventing, okay? Second thing, I can say now, I can control for socio-economic, whether your parents are blue collar or white collar. So I will say that the reference is white collar and the variable here is blue collar. And you see that having a father or mother blue collar reduces your probability of inventing. But also when you control for that, you reduce further, you reduce further the coefficient. Because in fact, you see, the thing is that the correlation with income could be due to effect of income, that parents can pay better schools, but in Finland it's not very relevant. It could be because they can pay you a collateral to start a new business, okay? But it could be because richer parents are better educated and they transmit education to you. Or it could be because they have higher economic status. Or it could be because they tend to have smarter children, for some reason. Maybe for the IQ test, it's good that you are well pampered. If you've been eating bad food, I think you fail your IQ test partly. It could be also that there is a correlation, that you have smarter parents, smarter children. We don't know about that. That we don't take a position. Okay. And we look at those things. And yes?
Uncontroversial.
Sorry?
It would be non-controversial, right? So, genetics. To have smart parents are more likely to be smart. So it could just be negative.
We are very cautious there because people, you know, I know, but it's it could be, it could not be. We don't take a position there. Okay, we don't. It could be genetic, it could be non-genetic. We say that, voilà. But it's true that there is a positive correlation between father IQ and children IQ. We see that. Now, we don't take a position on what determines. There are psychologists who work, Steven Pinker and others have worked on that, and we don't want to enter that debate ourselves. You see what I mean? Yeah, there is a funny Belgian comic, but I won't, it's another joke, I don't have time. Okay. Nobody's from Belgium here? No, nobody from Belgium. Laura Lone, you know Laura Lone? Laura Lone is very funny. But anyway, I don't want to go Laura. Okay, so it's a very funny story actually. It's a pity I don't have time to take this joke. So you have the blue collar. So having parents blue collar reduce your probability of inventing, and once you control for a socio-economic status, you see that the coefficient of income goes down a bit. Here now, you control for the education of the parents, because I know the education of the parents. If you control for parents or father or mother having a PhD or a master in science, you see that first it has a positive and significant effect, the education of the parents. And once you control for the education of the parents, you see that the direct coefficient on income goes down further. And then what I can do is to control for the IQ of the individual. You see that there is a big effect of IQ, and once I control for IQ, again, the coefficient goes down. You see? And so, when I represent it, and now this thing, before I used to show a scattered plot, now I show the result of the regression. And the result of regression, this is the relationship between top income and the probability of between income of the parents and the father income and the probability of inventing, when I don't put any control. That's this curve. It goes from there to there. Then I control for socioeconomic status. Then I control for parental education, and then I control for IQ. And you see that already a lot has been explained, because the curve becomes much flatter when you have control for all these things. But you still have a residual role for income, but much less than what you would have if you didn't control for that. Now, it could be that in the US, you will have still a bigger role of income, even when you control for the other things, because, you know, in the US, you need to be rich to go to, you know, money makes a bigger difference than in Finland to be educated. Okay? So now it was very funny that you can compare inventors, medical doctors and lawyers, and you can do R-square composition. How much of the correlation is between parental income and probability of inventing is explained by the various things. And the nice thing is that, you see, for inventor, IQ is the main thing, and then comes parental education. But for medical doctors, IQ is much less important, and for lawyers as well, you see. So now I'm very afraid when I see a medical doctor and a lawyer. My God, I try to avoid lawyers, okay? But for them, parental education is much more important. That's very interesting, huh? Yeah. You see, you can see that here. That's the importance of IQ for being an inventor compared in the R-square decomposition. Here, that's parental education, and that's parental education for medical doctors and lawyers, and that's IQ for them, you see. That's interesting. Alors now you could say, well, IQ, it could be endogenous IQ. Well, we say that it could be. But one thing we can do is we could say it could be very much family determining IQ. We say we want to try to deal with the problem. One thing we did, ideally we would like to look at twins. If we could look at twins, all family characteristics are the same. The problem is that twin inventors in Finland, you may have one twin, but only inventors. Such a small country, you see what I mean? So we cannot do twins, we do quasi-twins. That means brothers that are less than 3 years apart, okay? So we assume that family characteristics are almost the same. And then what you see is that IQ is almost as significant when you control for the family fixed effect, which is for when you look at only the difference of IQ between you and your close brother, you see that the coefficient of IQ is almost as high as it was before. You see, that's very interesting. Huh? So that means that IQ captures something on top of family, even controlling for family characteristics. That it goes in the other direction, but we are cautious still, okay? Okay, you can look at family structure. For example, I had a very nasty stepfather, okay? They didn't care about me. My father was much nicer than my stepfather. The stepfather doesn't care so much, but he's more like a competitor, the stepfather. But for me, maybe you have nice stepfathers. Mine was a nasty guy, okay? And you can see, you don't have the stepfather there. I think you have, but you have a negative stepfather effect on inventing. It's a miracle if I invented ever, having had a stepfather, okay? So try to avoid stepfathers, stepmothers. I mean, be careful, because if you want your child to be an innovator, be careful. But what you can see is that having your biological father away is not good. And you can see also that the income of your biological father will have much less of a positive effect if your father is not close to you. That's very interesting. Huh? You see? It's not just the income per se. So that's again the idea that what's behind the income is it's the fact that it's the education, is what he brings to it, the aspirations, what he tells you. If he's away, he doesn't tell you about aspirations. You see what I mean? And that counts a lot for your probability of inventing. Another thing we look at is misallocation. You can regress the probability of inventing on parental income, IQ, and the interaction. And what you find is that having a father in the top percentiles has a positive interaction term with IQ, which means that if I have a very high IQ, but I am born in a very poor family, it's a drama, because it kills, you have a potential Einstein that's killed, essentially. Or maybe that was not true in Soviet Union, you see what I mean? Because there you would have more mobility, I don't know. But even in Finland, If you are a very high IQ and you are born to family which is very poor, maybe probably rural and all that, you see, they won't see your IQ, they won't exploit your IQ. And you are much less likely to be an inventor. So of course you could say one policy will detect the high IQ, but of course we detect them at military service, and you take them away from the parents. That would be horrible. The better way is to educate everybody for several generations, to make sure that you don't miss the Einstein. You see what I mean? You want to give all the possibilities so that you can detect at school the high IQ and push them, no matter the social origins. And that's what you would like to promote. You see what I mean? And that's what this tells you. Because otherwise you are missing a lot, because you have potential Einsteins that you are missing. You see what I mean? They were Einstein, but they were born, they were born in a family that did not understand where the potential that they had. You see what I mean? Okay, that behave like the military service captain says, go and wash the toilets. Okay? Alors now, when you control for own education, it's very interesting, because when I control for own education, the father income becomes much less significant, and when you control for own education, you see all the other things become very much less significant, and it means even IQ loses, not significance, but coefficient. Because in fact, the story is that when you have own education, most of the thing goes through education. In education means, do you have a PhD in science or master in science, basically. Okay? And that makes everything. IQ, it becomes small. You still have a role for IQ, even when you control for education, but all the other things become almost nothing. And so the idea is that, in fact, you have two main things. It's IQ and education. But in education, as inputs, you have IQ, and you have parental education. And that's the story. What makes an inventor is IQ and education. But IQ has a direct effect and an indirect effect through the fact that your probability that you have a master in science and a PhD. But your parental education is also an input into your own education. You see what I mean? But it goes a lot through your own education. So that's how the clear policy lesson try to have an education system that try to make sure that even people who don't have educated parents or rich parents, they get as much as they could, through the education system. So for example, homework should be done at school, tutors, all these things are very important, of course, to make up for that. Okay. Now I go to returns. I look at the return to innovation. And when I look at the returns to innovation, I look at firms, and I look at you have an innovation at date 0, and you look at the evolution of income for the innovator and the people who work with the innovator. And that's very interesting, because the inventors is in red. The inventor is here. And you can see that the inventors already start gaining more before the patent is granted. So that means that the firm anticipates that you are innovative. They know that you are up to something. They want to retain you. And they start rewarding you before the grant, because they're afraid that you might leave the firm. And they start already rewarding you. That's very interesting. The reward comes even before the patent. And that would also explain why we were given a hard time when we did a paper with Blondel, because people were thought it was so fast between innovation and the top income inequality. But because in fact you start paying people even before the innovation is granted. You see? Yes?
Sorry, shouldn't this lag be lower in places that have good financial services?
Sorry?
So in places that have working financial systems that
Yeah.
are efficient, then the lag should be shorter.
Probably, and you could look at that. We haven't interacted with financial systems. That would be a very interesting thing to do a cross-region with different financial systems. And then you see you keep gaining again in the long run. So you gain already before, and then you gain again before. That's the inventor. But you see what's very interesting is that blue collars and white collars in the same firm, they also gain a little bit. But there are many more of them. So you see, as a total, here it may look small, but you have many more blue collars and white collars than inventors. And so as a total, they will gain a lot actually. And that's the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur, we call entrepreneur someone who has at least one half of the firm belonging to him or her. And they lose initially because they put their own money. You see? They lose before, but they gain much more after. You see what I mean? So, if you look now, that's a camembert. Camembert cheese. You like camembert? Good. Okay. So we look, of course, at the gate. We aggregate it, because the gate, we look at the gate over 10 years, and we aggregate them. And we look at the aggregated gate, and we see that the inventor only gets 8% of the total. Then you have blue collars and white collars. They get, because there are many of them, they get much more. And here is what the entrepreneur gets, and the entrepreneur gets the bulk of it, you see? And that's very interesting because in Chetty, Bell et al., they have that paper and they discuss, you see, taxation. It's true that the inventors, they are in the top income, but they are not in the top 0 or 1%. They are more in the top 1% or top 10. And they said, therefore, you could afford to tax the 0.1 because you would not harm innovation. But that's a wrong view, because it's like a producer of a movie. If you kill the producer, you kill the director. You see what I mean? So you have to be very careful when you look at taxation that people work in teams. And if you kill the entrepreneur, you may kill also the inventor. The invention will not take place. You have to look at the whole hierarchy of the firm. And what's interesting is that the returns are shared within the firm. Yes?
And this is also the successful innovators, because the patent is red. So
yes.
Risk adjusted, it's lower. There's other...
But they don't lose. You see, the thing is that it's not that if they lose innovation, they lose money. They get a fixed wage, you see. That's compared to if they don't innovate.
The entrepreneurs.
Yeah, they lose at the beginning. The thing is a reward, exactly. And exactly, so all the more because they lose before. If you tax them, you will discourage them completely. Absolutely, absolutely. So you reward the risk taking, absolutely. So conclusion, credit constraints in Finland are not the main impediment to become an inventor. What matters is education and IQ. And the second thing is that the return is much higher for the entrepreneur than the inventor. It's important for tax policy. So overall, what we have shown there is that innovation is a source of top income. Innovation itself generates social mobility and doesn't affect global inequality, but not everybody becomes an innovator. And there may be lack of mobility into becoming an innovator, and their education is key to increase that mobility, okay? Now, I want to go back to my initial debate, and I will go back to, and then I will conclude there. So let me go there, and then I conclude. I want to conclude with the following slide, so let me go to this part. Okay, and then view, slideshow, from beginning. Okay, so I want to just go there. You see, the thing is that, okay, I told you top inequality. I said innovation is a source of top inequality, but it increases social mobility. In fact, with using the returns data I have, I can show that you are also more likely to get top income on individual data. So the advantage of the Finnish thing is that I can show the social mobility on individual data. Okay, so that reinforces the thing on social mobility. But you also increase top percent, the probability of being top percent. So I showed that I showed on aggregate data for US, on individual data for Finland. Okay? Now, you could say, well, my first reflex is to say that my difference with Piketty, I said there is a reform that enhances innovation. By doing so, it may increase the share of the top income, but it doesn't reduce social mobility, it may even increase social mobility, and it does not increase global inequality. I would take a reform like this, because if I can enhance growth without reducing social mobility and without increasing global inequality, I take it, even if it increases top income inequality. Piketty would not take it. You see what I mean? That's the difference. For example, putting the flat tax on capital income in Sweden in the 90s did exactly that. It spurred innovation and growth. It increased the top income, but social mobility has not gone down in Sweden, and the Gini only increased very mildly in Sweden. So that was worth doing. For Piketty, it was a mistake to do that. You see the difference between us? And now you could say, does it mean that you don't worry about the top income? No, there is one problem with the top income, and that goes back to what I said at the very beginning. I said that the big contradiction in the Schumpeterian thing, you want to give rents to innovation, but you don't want people to use these rents to put entry barriers. So that's the same with the top income share. I worry about, I don't have a problem with people driving a Cadillac as in my time, or a very fancy car. That's no problem for me. What I want to make sure is that they don't prevent competition. They don't use the money they have to erect entry barriers. And they don't use the money they have to prevent political changes, for example, towards more pro-competition economy. That's what I worry. But then, tax policy is not the only instrument, and that's another divergence I have with Piketty. For Piketty, only tax policy is relevant. But I say no, there are other instruments as well. Competition policy, you need very strong antitrust, okay? And you need very strict rules for financial political campaigns. So for example, when the US allowed, when the Supreme Court allowed companies to finance politicians with no limits recently, that was very bad, because that gave enormous power to incumbents to influence the political game in the US. In Sweden, it's very strictly monitored. You have very strict limits. And if you accept private money, you are denounced right away. You see what I mean? So you need to have these very strong rules, pro-competition and anti-corruption. And of course the media, that's where the media freedom is important. Because when you don't have media freedom, you have more corruption. What media do mainly is to denounce the corruption, to denounce the lobbying. And that's very important. You want to have more competition, you need more media freedom, you need more antitrust. That's very important, because otherwise the incumbents prevent subsequent innovation. So the top 1% for me is not a problem per se, if provided they cannot use this money to prevent competition and bias the political game, okay? And that's where you need a set of instruments that guarantee that that happens. If you don't have this kind of instrument, then you have a slow innovative economy, because the incumbents rule the game. Because you see, they make the rules and they prevent subsequent innovations. So it doesn't mean, so you see the lesson is, I worry about the top 1%, but again for reason different from Piketty. Piketty is just because he thinks it's envy. You should have a richer person than me. Me, it's a different thing. I worry about that because I'm afraid, for Schumpeterian reasons I worry about that. Because I know that growth is driven by innovation, and I know that incumbents can use their money to prevent innovations. So that's why I believe that the right model to talk about the relationship between top income inequality and growth is the model where you have innovation at the center of the growth process. You see, otherwise you miss the main part, and you may come up with wrong policy prescriptions. You see, that's the thing. For example, even in his theory, he was R minus G. He said R minus G increasing was the reason. But then he was proposing more capital taxation. But more capital taxation in an innovation-based economy would reduce growth. So G would go down, and R minus G would go up even further. And that would go against what he wants to do. But it turns out that R minus G is not correlated with top income. He didn't do cross-country regression or cross-country panel. If he had done it, he would see that it doesn't work. R minus G is not correlated. It's not a low growth phenomenon. The inequality is not a low growth phenomenon. It's driven partly by innovation. And that makes a very different story. Alors, it's true that nowadays you have more concentration of markups and a secular stagnation. So it's true that what you have, it's true that nowadays you have, but then again it's an innovation story. It's true that nowadays you are moving this way, so competition goes down and growth goes down and markup go up. So it's true that currently you have a story where G is going down and concentration is going up. But the whole conundrum goes through the relationship between competition and innovation. You see what I mean? Which are absent for his analysis. It doesn't have competition. It doesn't have innovation. And that's what I try to bring. It's saying, I think the right framework is the Schumpeterian framework I developed here. I think I will stop there. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Yes.
I have a question. Let's say combine yesterday's lecture with
Yeah.
today's lecture and talk a bit about long-run growth.
Yeah.
Which shows several century-long slides. So the stylized text on inequality is increasing over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
My reading of today's lecture is that this is partly because innovation goes up, right?
Yeah.
But if let me remind you, yesterday, the first slide, the second slide, when you showed GDP dynamic, here we observe different slide, different trend, increasing trend. But if innovation story, we should observe over this. I'm just trying to combine yesterday and today.
Yeah, that's right.
From the perspective
Yeah.
of the whole 20th century.
Yeah. So in fact, what I believe is that top income inequality was partly innovation increasing is a force of top income inequality. Okay, so you have a force of growth, and you can show also that growth in frontier countries is more positively correlated with top income inequality. You can show that actually, and it's true that in the latest period you've observed a reduction in TFP growth and inequality still going up. And I think that what happened there is that you have a reduction in competition. You see what I mean? Over the latest period. You see what I mean? You had overall an increase in patents, but it's true that you had still a decline in things. And what I believe is that partly, many of them were defensive. Maybe it was something like this. And I think what happened is that over the latest period, it was a decreasing competition. But due to previous innovators, so you need innovation there, because who provokes the reduction in competition? People who become big, the GAFAs, for example, become big there, and then they become impediments to competition. You see what I mean? But competition is at the heart, competition innovation is at the heart of that story, you see, which you don't have. None of these elements are in the R minus G story, you see. That's my answer. Yes? And R is interest rate, you know. He said the interest rate minus the growth rate. So he said whenever you have low growth period, R minus G go. Because he says R is the rate at which capital goes up, and G is the rate at which the economy goes up. So, so he says the lower G compared to R, the more you concentrate income in capital. You see what I mean? But the thing is that in fact, you can show that cross-country panel, you don't have that correlation. It doesn't work in cross-country panel regression. So he should have at least tried that regression. He would have seen that it doesn't work. You don't have it. Yes?
Yeah, I have another question about yesterday's lecture, actually, or two lectures. You showed us yesterday those two pictures with Japan.
Yeah.
The sort of more
Yeah.
exponential type
Yeah.
growth in Sweden.
Yeah.
And then you said one source of innovation is actually improvement in the general system.
Yeah, exactly. Management practices. Yes.
Then on that slide, Japan was actually above Sweden, and they both were like United States, Japan, and Sweden.
Yeah, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah,
it's true.
So
they have good managerial, but you know, that's not enough to innovate. In Japan, I mean, there's been a book, I'm caricaturing Japan there. There is a book written by a Belgian writer called Amélie Nothomb. Nobody has read Amélie Nothomb? Stupeur and Tremblement. She tells when she works in a Japanese firm. They cannot fire, they never fire people. But they scream at people, you see. And they do like this, you know, and you know, that does not, you know, favor inventiveness. You see what I mean? If you take an initiative that they don't like and you bypass your hierarchy, you will start people will start, you know, scolding you. So I'm being a bit caricatural, you see what I mean? So they have, in terms of delivering, they deliver, but that's good for imitation, for fulfilling an objective, but that's not good for innovating, you see what I mean? Well, there is innovation in Japan, but I think the education system in Japan is very much geared towards being good imitators, not so much, they don't, but the French system was a bit like that, you see, very, you know, I don't know here, but, you know, learn by heart, blah, 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 you know what I mean? Don't try to be creative. But that's important to have an education system where they teach you the basic mechanism, but they also encourage you to be inventive. I think that's very important. And that's something that also France didn't have, not just Japan.
More questions?
It's the presence, yeah?
Oh.
Wait. First of all, when we invited Philippe, we knew it would be good, but we didn't know it would be that good. So we definitely didn't have the
Like good wines.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we had a wonderful time, I think.
Thank you very much.
For
Thanks for inviting me. It was very
walking on the Red Square also.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, we worked on the Red Square, yeah.
Yeah, now the present. The present, this is for a girlfriend, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, she will love it. Yeah.
I'm sure she will.
She will.
Yeah. And now this is a book, so this is a
Oh, yes,
book
of
about
course.
history.
Of course.
But let me also say, it's a history of the New Economic School, and
Yeah.
why it's appropriate here, because you were connected to
Yeah.
the school.
Yes.
You are and you will be.
Yes.
So as a member of International Advisory Board.
Yeah.
So thank
So
you
thanks very much.
for
And it was
everything.
really
Unfortunately, the trip is to take the taxi to the airport, and God knows how long it will take.
Yeah.
So thank
Exactly.
you. Thank you.
And I have to check in the well as well. Very much. You are wonderful hosts, and it's a great place, the New Economic School, and I will, you can count on me to be among your
Let's go.
supporters. Unconditional. Excellent. Thank you so much, Lobo.
Thank you.
You are a wonderful host. Really. Thank you to everybody.
It was easy to be here.
Yeah. You are very patient with me from the beginning. Yeah. You have a lot of stories to tell.